Welcome, everybody, to the Attorney General's office. I'm Peter Neronha, the Attorney General of the state of Rhode Island, and we are here today to give you and the public an update on the status of our ongoing opioids litigation, which will, with respect to some defendants, continue after today, but we do have a significant update to announce today. I want to begin by recognizing some of my colleagues in government that are here with me today. And the reason they're here today is because some of the mayors of cities and towns have been involved in the litigation. Our state leaders are here as well because there is a significant amount of money that will be coming to the state of Rhode Island, and it is under their leadership that that money will need to be directed to exactly the same place. And that same place is to remedy and abate this opioid crisis that we have been facing for so long. So first I want to recognize Governor McKee, who was a part of this effort dating back to when he was lieutenant governor. Organized cities and towns to bring their own litigation in addition to the litigation brought by this office. So he has certainly been a leader in this space. Senate President Ruggiero is here as well. The Speaker Sakarchi is here. Also here is Secretary Womazetta Jones, who will have a big role in determining and guiding the distribution of these funds, again, to get to exactly the right place. I want to also acknowledge representing the cities and towns, and all 39 cities and towns are participating in the agreement, the settlement that we are announcing here today, but representing those cities and towns are Mayor Alorza, Mayor Lombardi from North Providence, Mayor Alorza, of course, from Providence, and Andy Noda, who is the town administrator in East Greenwich, and I will say was once the town administrator in my hometown of Jamestown. So Andy has served superbly multiple municipalities. I also want to recognize a few other town administrators that are here and thank them for coming. Stephen Contenti from Bristol is here. Mayor De Silva, I believe, is here from East Providence. Town Manager Mollis is here. I see him back there. Town Manager Mollis, thank you for coming. Town Manager Kate Machad from Warren is here. Phil Gould, the Town Administrator from Lincoln, is here. Kate is from Warren, if I didn't mention that. And Karen Pinch, a longtime friend, is here as well from Richmond. I also want to recognize John Tassoni, Senator Tassoni, who's done such great work in this space for so long, and Linda Hurley is also here from Kodak. So great community partners in this space, and today I believe is a good day for the people of the state of Rhode Island. It's no secret that the opioid crisis is something that this state has faced for a very, very long time. What you see on the graphic behind you are just the numbers over the last 5 years. But this is a fight that has gone on for a very, very long time. I remember in August of 2011, I stood in a room much like this one as U.S. Attorney when we brought an action and settled a case against Google for $500 million. And the point of that case, often forgotten today, a decade later, is that was about Google aiding foreign pharmacies importing opioids into the United States without a prescription. And I think if all of us could have seen or read the tea leaves correctly then, we would have understood that the fact that there was a market for people going online to buy opioids without a prescription and Google assisting those offshore pharmacies, we would have seen the crisis that was still yet to come in full force and effect. And we talk about the numbers, and it was really important to me as we developed this slide with these numbers. The first iteration of it had a estimate. More than 1,600 people, I think, was the first iteration of this number. And I wanted the team to go back and put a specific number on each one of these years, because every number is a person, every number is a family. And every family has been impacted by this crisis. I think all of us in this room have lost a family member or know somebody who has. And this crisis is long from over. This next slide shows you a little bit of the track of this really complicated litigation. When I think about sort of what we've done here in this space and what continues to need to be done, I really break it down into a number of categories. So there are companies that manufactured opioids. The two principal ones that are at issue here in our case are Johnson & Johnson and Purdue and the Sacklers. So we're here today to announce a settlement with Johnson & Johnson as a manufacturer. I'll talk a little bit about Purdue later on in this presentation, but they are not part of the settlement that we announced today. There are also, there's another manufacturer, Teva, that is also not part of the settlement that we announced today. And again, I'll talk about where we're going with that litigation towards the end of this presentation. But we're here today to announce a settlement with Johnson & Johnson and also to announce a settlement with three major opioid distributors, AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal, and McKesson. And as I said earlier, it has been a bit of a tortured path. This litigation has been incredibly complex. There's been a ton of work done here in the state since we filed on behalf of this office and the people of the state of Rhode Island an actual case. It's not been done everywhere around the country. What that required was a ton of litigation, pre-litigation work as we approached our initial trial date of January of this year. So I want to break down for you the monies that have been recovered to date and then the new monies that we're announcing today. So what we've already announced is our $2.59 million settlement with McKinsey for their role in fueling the opioid epidemic. That was announced last year, and some of that money is already being put to good effect. There was as many of you know, there was a gap in our ability to fund Narcan or naloxone last year, and this money was used, a portion of this money was used to fill that gap. That's a good example, I think, of how we anticipate and will require, frankly, this money to be used. It must be used, and it will be used, and we will be keeping a very careful eye to make sure that it will be used to fund programs and projects that will abate this opioid crisis. This is the new portion of the settlement that we are announcing today. This is a $21.1 million settlement with Johnson & Johnson for their role in the opioid crisis. As I said, they were a manufacturer. In our judgment, they downplayed and were deceptive concerning the risk of using opioids. And as a result of our settling with that company today, $21.1 million will be returned to the state of Rhode Island for opioid abatement. We are also settling, as I mentioned, with the three major opioid distributors, AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal, and McKesson. That is $90.8 million that will be delivered to the state of Rhode Island over a period of time that will be used, again, pursuant to that agreement solely for opioid abatement. And so if you look at this slide, what this shows you is the breakdown of the monies that will be distributed to the state of Rhode Island for purposes, again, of opioid abatement. It totals roughly $114 million. And again, that money will be directed to one place and one place only, and that is to address the ongoing opioid crisis that we face in the state. This, again, just drives that point home. I know that throughout my conversations with many people in this space over now a very long period of time, the question has always been, and frankly it is one of my regrets with respect to the Google settlement that we achieved over a decade ago. That money could not be used directly for opioid abatement. It had to be used for law enforcement purpose. It did a lot of good, including places like North Providence and other places, East Providence and the state generally, but it could not be driven to opioid abatement. That's why it was really important, I think, for me and my fellow attorneys general around the country as we negotiated these settlements, and most states have joined a version of this settlement, that all of the monies be used for opioid abatement and that there be safeguards in place to make sure that that actually happens. So what is opioid abatement? I think most of us, can intuitively understand what that is, but just as a reminder, it can go to things like treatment, overdose rescue programs, prevention, and recovery. I don't think that it will be difficult to find opportunities and programs and initiatives to use this money. As I said, just the gap that we saw last year for Narcan and naloxone, I was grateful that we were able to, working with the Secretary, to get the money to where it needed to be. But there's no question that this money is needed and can be put to good use. These settlements are about more than just money, though. in all instances, both McKinsey and the distributors are going to be required to take actions to make sure that going forward that the kind of behavior that we've seen in the past does not happen again. Some of that, frankly, is just doing a better job of reporting to state and federal authorities suspicious orders. I think, you know, if I look back on it, and again, the Google experience kind of informs this, you know, there was this time period in our country when opioids were simply handed out like candy. Doctors were prescribing them. Pharmacies were filling them. Distributors were distributing them. If you looked at the data and saw the data, you could see problems, and yet nothing was done about them. And that's true in government too. I know that, I remember as U.S. Attorney, one of my great frustrations, frankly, was that the DEA was not doing everything in Rhode Island that I felt that they should be doing regarding pill diversion. And that is something that stays with me today. Hopefully, as part of this settlement, we will be in a better place as a state working with our federal partners to identify suspicious orders as they go forward. But there's no question that that has been a challenge in the past. So, as I said, this has been a complicated process. So we'll get into this a little bit, but the bottom line is this, that there has been multi-district litigation that the cities and towns have participated in Ohio as part of a lawsuit that they brought. Our lawsuit here, the Attorney General's office, our lawsuit was brought here in Superior Court in Rhode Island. Some of my Attorney General colleagues are part of what's called a multi-state litigation. And so getting all of these parties around a table to try to reach an agreement that would satisfy everybody has been complicated. And so the question for me, frankly, here all along was, given that we had filed a case, we had a trial date coming, what was in the best interest of this state in terms of whether to settle the case as part of the global settlement, with a few additional things, hopefully for Rhode Islanders, or simply to proceed to trial. And ultimately, it was my judgment that this was the best resolution for the people of the state. It enhances the global settlement that all but a handful of states have signed on to in a couple of ways. First of all, it will speed the monies up in terms of their arrival here in the state of Rhode Island. So the first payment under the global settlement that many states will be subject to won't be until the summer. Under our negotiated agreement, the first payment will be within a few weeks, and then there'll be a second payment in the summer of 2022. You know, again, as I mentioned, this has been a really complicated series of negotiations, and part of it has been complicated by the relationship between cities and towns that have brought their own lawsuit on behalf of the population of their cities and towns, and the Attorney General who sued, I sued, and my colleagues around the country have sued on behalf of every person in the state, including all the people in those same cities and towns. And so working out an agreement that doesn't double count people, I won't hold back from you, has been complicated. But what I can say is that because of that complication, the agreements around the country are still somewhat in doubt. By negotiating our own independent agreement, we can guarantee that these monies will in fact flow to the state of Rhode Island. And the other plus for doing the settlement this way is we anticipate a significant additional amount of money. You know, if I had to estimate it, I would say it's in the range of about $10 million, which will reflect the work of this office, the lawyers in this office, in addition to outside counsel, which is something separate, but the work of this office in terms of our own litigative costs, that it is my intention to drive back into this settlement so that the monies that will reflect the work by this office on behalf of the people of the state of Rhode Island will not be held by this office, but will in fact be returned to the General Assembly and state government to be allocated for opioid abatement. And so that's an enhancement to the global settlement that I think will serve the people of Rhode Island well. This is a slide that is so small that even I can't see it from here. I'm looking out over your shoulders. But what I think it's meant to reflect really is what I just mentioned. And I see Eva Mancuso is here, and I give her great credit for her work on behalf of the cities and towns. The cities and towns, again, organized by Governor McKee when he was Lieutenant Governor, brought a lawsuit. That's the Municipalities Lawsuit, which you see on the right, and then there's our lawsuit on the left. And it's really just meant to show that there were a lot of people working really hard for the people of the state. I'm not going to say that it didn't at times make this negotiation somewhat more complicated, but we ultimately achieve the maximum amount of money is achievable for the state of Rhode Island. And I will tell you that if you were to break this settlement down on a per capita basis, that Rhode Island does very, very well compared to our peers in Massachusetts. I think if you were to look, if you were to compare, Massachusetts signed on to the global deal, Connecticut signed on to the global deal, I believe Vermont did as well. And if you look at it on a per capita basis, a dollar for dollar per capita basis, Rhode Island per Rhode Islander did better than any of those states. This is largely a population-driven settlement. It was the amount that each state received under the global settlement was driven mostly by population, with some small enhancement for the intensity of the crisis in each individual state. But Rhode Island here did better than Connecticut and Massachusetts on a per capita basis. So this is how the monies will be broken down. And this breakdown here, again, reflects what I've just been talking about, this interplay between the cities and towns having their own lawsuit and the state of Rhode Island through this office having a lawsuit as well. The bottom line is that 100% of the money will be going to opioid abatement. I keep emphasizing that because I know how important that is to Rhode Islanders, that this money recovered for this purpose will be used to address this crisis. There has always, I think, been a sense, and I don't want to speak for the cities and towns, that they needed their own voice in these negotiations, that they did not want this to be a top-down agreement, that they wanted to receive funds directly. You know, I obviously, on behalf of all the people in the state, like to think that I represent all of them, would treat them all equally, care for them all just the same, whether you live in Westerly or Woonsocket. And so we tried to craft an arrangement that would really accomplish both things. So 20% of these monies will go directly to the cities and towns for them to use as they deem fit for purposes of opioid abatement. The remaining 80% will be allocated to the state, again, for opioid abatement. And that money also will go to the cities and towns because it will go to the people of the state of Rhode Island who live in those cities and towns. So the winners here, regardless of how the money gets to them, whether it be through the cities or towns or through the state, the winners here are the people of the state of Rhode Island. But that explains why the agreement is structured the way that it is. So how will the money be spent? Who will be deciding how the money is spent? Well, I will tell you that even if I wanted to be that person, and frankly I do not, the last thing I want to do is to be a grant maker. I know that some of my colleagues in government do that, and it probably comes with more headaches than it's worth, but that is not something that I want to do, nor is it something that by law I can do. Under state law, all of the money is recovered by this office, and they are in the tens of millions of dollars, and really every year must be appropriated by the General Assembly. And that is by state statute, and in my judgment, frankly, that's the way it should be. I don't think we want attorneys general as grant makers. I don't think that is in the best interest of the people of the state. So, recognizing though that we want lots of input as to how this money should be spent, and we want to make very, very sure that the money is spent in exactly the right way. And I know everyone up here shares that view. We have established an advisory committee that will consist of broad representatives from around the state, both from the public sector and from those in public health and the community that can inform and advise Secretary Jones as she determines how to recommend to the General Assembly how to spend this money. And so that advisory committee has not been stood up yet. It will be. But it will have representatives from every part of the state. So Providence will be represented. Every other county in the state, including Providence County, will have a representative. So Providence will not be the only representative for Providence County. It's our largest county in the state, so we took that into account. So Providence will have a seat at the table, along with a representative from a city or town from each of the other 5 counties, well, 5 including Providence in the state. There will be 3 public health experts on this committee. It's really important that those are good and smart choices. You know, obviously, I think all of us know today that whether we're talking about COVID or we're talking about opioids, that we need the guidance of our public health officials to inform where this money should be spent and where it can do the most good. And then there will be 2 community representatives as well. And obviously, community voices are really important for us to hear. As we determine how this money can be best spent. And of course, we're going to build on some of the good thinking through the overdose prevention task force, started under Governor Raimondo, it's continued under Governor McKee, that has a whole host really bright, smart minds from all aspects of coming at this problem from all aspects that can really advise where this money can and should go. We've talked about abatement. I must have mentioned it now 6 or 7 times. I think you get the point. It's really important to me and to everyone here that this money go to this end and to no other. So, where do we go from here? As I mentioned, the first payments will be coming in the next few weeks. The documents are being, I think were filed yesterday or will be filed today. I believe they were filed yesterday. We've got to stand up that advisory committee and get them to work. We have to reach out to the community partners to get, frankly, the advisory committee. I have a seat at that table. There are many others, as I mentioned, to get ideas, bold ideas as to how we can address this crisis. And as I said, the distributions are subject to the appropriations process, but we anticipate that happening this summer. So what's left to do? As I mentioned, we are still in litigation with 2 entities. One is the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma. Just to remind you where we are on that, this office has brought a lawsuit against the Sacklers, both as individual family members, I believe 8 or 9 of them, as well as Rhodes Pharmaceuticals and Purdue Pharma. Purdue filed for bankruptcy back in 2019. This office has I've consistently objected to that bankruptcy. The Sackler family has spirited $10.4 billion out of the country. They want to escape liability for this crisis for paying far less. That is something that I and 8 of my fellow attorneys general around the country continue to object to. We're in the process of continuing to object today as we speak in New York. And so that litigation continues. Frankly, what Purdue was offering was $21 million over 9 years. It's just not enough to remedy their role in this crisis. So that work continues. We had a win in the district court in New York where those third-party releases for the Sackler family members were denied by a district court judge down there. That is now on appeal in the Second Circuit. We're going to continue to fight that fight with that small group of attorneys general, which I have banded together with, and we will continue to bring that fight. And then we have a case against Teva that continues, and our trial date is in March, and we will continue to bring that fight. I started this presentation by giving you some numbers. And I mentioned in the context of mentioning those numbers that there are people and families behind every one of them. I think all of us, whether you're watching now or later or whether you're here in this room, can think of a person or a family member or a friend of a friend who suffered from this crisis. With us today is Deb Parente, and Deb is someone that I've known since when I was U.S. Attorney. And so when I think about this money and what I hope it will do is save people like her son Peter, who overdosed in 2015 when he was 25 years old. And Deb and I spoke to high school students around the state when I was U.S. Attorney. And I saw in those presentations not only Deb's enormous strength and the way that she reached high school students, and we did a ton of these talks, but as they approached Peter's birthday or Mother's Day, I saw the heartbreak in Deb's eyes. And she was comforted by students. I know, Deb, you remember this. You were comforted by those students who came and hugged you after those presentations. So when I think about this crisis, I think less about the numbers and I think more about the people like Peter. And I will tell you, I've never seen in my years of public service more strength than I saw at Westerly High School in October of 2017. In October of 2017, Deb was there, and she will remember this. There was a high school senior, and she had traveled this path from addiction to recovery. And she was speaking to the entire junior class at Westerly High School. You remember this, Deb? And she was telling them about her journey on that path. And the Westerly Sun reported it. If you're interested in the story, you can go back and find it. And what she told her fellow classmates was, I never thought it would happen to me. I was a mess my sophomore year. But I'm here, and I'm beating it. And so behind all the heartbreak, there's also hope. And it is my hope that with these funds, that other families will experience hope and less heartbreak.